So Ryan Dusick, welcome to the Comfort, Peace, and Freedom podcast. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me on.
So, full disclosure, I do have a set of DW drums in my basement right now.
Nice.
I'm certainly not a world-class rocker like yourself, but I'm a recreational weekend and sometimes play out type of guy. And I'm trying to think of where I first figured I really love the drums, and I can only come to two conclusions. It must have been the drum roll in Stairway to Heaven, or maybe the one with Phil Collins from In the Air Tonight. Do you remember those?
Of course, those are both, iconic.
When did you first pick up your sticks, and what were you listening to at the time?
Well, I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid in LA in the 80s, and it was the era of MTV, of course. And I think my first drumming hero was Stuart Copeland of The Police. He was very unique, had a lot of unique influences and flair and the way that he played. But I picked up the drumsticks in the late 80s when I was about 12. And that was the era of the hair metal bands.
Yeah, exactly.
So my first images that I was emulating was, those big cages that they had, like 18 drums and 47 cymbals, and
right.
The guys that were just flailing around and twirling their sticks, like Tommy Lee and Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses, and other headbangers ball era heroes of MTV. So I think I learned how to twirl my drumsticks before I learned how to like play a beat.
You remember Rush, where the guy would spin around in a circle and he had 360-degree stuff all the way around him?
Yeah, actually, I sat at his drum set at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in
Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah.
And that was fun because there's nothing like the Neil Peart drum set. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's super great. So did you know that was it when you first started playing? Did you know, like, this is going to be what I'm doing? I just have to do this?
Not right away. I mean, there was a little bit of fate to it, I suppose. My older brother had started playing the guitar when he was about 14, which would have made me 11. And I looked up to him. I thought he was always kind of like a nerdy kid until he started playing the electric guitar. And then for the first time, I was like, oh, my brother's cool. And he got really good really fast. He picked it up and just practiced all night until his fingers were bloody, and joined a band. And within like 6 weeks, he was playing on stage with a band and playing lead guitar. And so I was definitely inspired by that. And I said to my parents, my dad tells a story, and I don't know how accurate it is, but he says that I begged him and said, the drums are inside of me, just waiting to come out. And the same way, in the same way that Josh has had the guitar inside of him waiting to come out. So that was how that started. But it wasn't like I thought it was going to be a career or anything like that. It was just something that was a passion. I would come home from school every day, and just the first thing I wanted to do was sit at the drums and play for a couple hours and just bang it out. But it was pretty early on in high school when I started the band Cars Flowers that became Maroon 5, that it became more serious. We started getting interest from record labels pretty, like, within a year of forming the band when I was like 17.
Wow. And that's when you first met Adam. Did you meet him at that point, or had you known him for a while?
No, actually, Adam was a extended family friend of my family. We had a mutual family friend, the Salzmans. Manny Salzman was a guy that went to high school with my dad. He was friends with Fred Levine, or they worked together or something like that. So I knew Adam through the family connection, and we had even gone on a family trip together when I was like maybe 10 or 12 years old. He was a couple grades below me, and so just kind of seemed like a little annoying little brother at the time. But then we both started playing music, and we actually tried to start a band when we first picked up the instruments with Adam Salzman, Adam Levine, and me, and one other guy, and that didn't really go anywhere at the time. And I didn't even realize that Adam could sing at the time. He was just playing a rhythm guitar. But then a few years later, when I was in the school band and he was at the same high school with me, and I saw him sing for the first time, then that was like, okay, there's something here I want to work with. I want to start a band with. He was 14 at the time, so he was
Wow, that's
definitely
incredible.
a diamond in the rough at the time, but I saw something in him.
So at that point, the other day I saw an interview on 60 Minutes about the Eagles. It was actually 60 Minutes Australia, and they had the band there. And Don Henley said that his goal was just to hear himself on the radio. That's the whole reason he started playing music, because one day he wanted to hear himself on the radio. What was your initial goal to start this band with Adam and see where it went?
Well, we started the band in 1994, and that was at the sort of apex of the grunge era of alternative rock. And Adam and Jesse were huge Pearl Jam fans. Soundgarden was my favorite band, and Mickey was a Nirvana guy, but it was all, Seattle grunge. And,
Right.
and I think that our goal at that point was just to be cool,
Yeah.
to emulate our heroes and play, for me, really heavy, aggressive rock. I was a 16-year-old going through, the growing pains of adolescent angst, and I wanted to just bang it out and make a lot of noise. And it was a pretty realistic goal. We just wanted to get on stage at some of the clubs in Hollywood and have some of our friends and family come and watch us rock out. I don't think we really thought beyond that. We wanted to become a performing band in LA, not realizing that was a pretty cool thing to be, because we grew up in LA, but it was the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Roxy Theater and the Troubadour, all of these clubs that had a lot of history, the history of rock and roll, really, So, but that's where it started. We weren't thinking beyond that. But like I said, within a year of playing those clubs and making our first demo, then we started getting some interest, first from an independent label. And then, we kind of started to get stars in our eyes a little bit in terms of we could be the next Pearl Jam, or whatever it was.
Instead of playing them.
Right.
I think when I first got 10, Pearl Jam 10, I must have listened to that. I had a boat at the time, and I must have just burned that CD. I just listened to it so much as I did, as I did Songs About Jane. I mean, just unbelievable. At one point, did you say, okay, this is going to be big for us? I mean, do you remember the point where you said, holy cow, well, this is beyond just, playing in clubs and whatnot?
Well, we were humbled early on in our career in a way that made us re-examine the reality of the music industry. We had our first major record deal in '96, and put out an album on Reprise, Warner Brothers Records, in '97, and went on tour for the first time as just kids. I was 19 when we went on
Wow.
tour. And there was a lot of big talk at that time. The record label was saying, we're going to be the next big thing. You're our main priority in 1997. It's going to be a massive hit. You guys are going to be big stars. And so as kids, and we sort of just naively accepted that as fact, that's what was going to happen. And it didn't work out that way. The album flopped. We came back down to earth after 6 months of touring. We were home with our tails between our legs, collectively, and then essentially got dropped from our record label and had to just start over completely. And it took 5 years before we found our new sound, realized what direction we wanted to go, changed the name of the band to Maroon 5, and got our second record deal, which became, the album Songs About Jane, which came out in 2002. And I think that we were a lot more sure of ourselves at that point, in terms of we had done the work at that point. We were very precocious when we were in 1996, 7, we were just getting our first record deal, and we were beyond our years in some ways, but we hadn't really cut our teeth. We hadn't really proved ourselves or learned the things we needed to learn to actually put something out into the world of substance. So when it came to Songs About Jane, when we started writing those songs around 2000, 2001, that was when we realized, okay, now we've really found our sound. Now the arrangements are more mature. The songwriting is more complex. Adam found his voice as a lyricist and as a singer, and there's more soul and more grit to what we're doing. That all having been said, when we went in to make the album, it was definitely not a sure thing that this thing would be a big hit,
Right.
because every record label had passed on us at that point. They told us, you guys are a little R&B, you're a little bit pop, you're a little bit rock. We don't really know what to make of you, and you're good, but we don't know how we would promote you exactly. We took that as a compliment. You know, we thought that means we have a unique sound. We're going to stand out of the pack. But we also just didn't know if anyone would know how to fit it into a radio format or what that would mean. So we just went in and made a record the best we could, trying to fulfill, you know, our standards of what we thought an excellent record would be, with certainly the vision of wanting it to be a massive. I mean, we were talking about making an album on the level of Thriller, you know.
Right.
That's the way we were talking at that point. That might have been a little bit of Adam's ego becoming a little larger at that point. But we were all kind of like, let's make a record where start to finish, literally every track, every drum part, every bass line, every melody, every piano line, every riff sounds like a hook. You know, it sounds like something that is going to grab you and pull you
Sure.
into the song. And then we did it. And then of course we're in the middle of it and we're making the record. And when you're in the middle of a project like that, you get so inside of it and all you can hear are the imperfections. And so we were sure that we had blown it. We thought,
Wow.
this is we had our last one big chance, and at age 24, 25, we're done. This is it. This is the end of it.
So
Yeah.
success came pretty quickly after that, correct?
No, not at
No.
all. No.
Okay.
We went on the road in 2002 to promote that album, and we had a really slow, really organic build of our fan base, grassroots kind of thing.
Okay.
In 2002 and 2003, we played over 500 shows, club shows, small theater shows, opening for other acts, and then finally headlining in the fall of 2003. And we didn't even release our first single, I think, until late 2002. And it was a slow burn, Harder to Breathe. It was finally a moderate hit by the time we had our first headlining tour. And so it was a full 2 years before we released our pop single, This Love, to multiple formats. And we started traveling overseas, and the album came out overseas in the start of 2004. So and then at that point, it started to ramp up and escalate to a much higher level. And that's when it felt like it was a big hit.
The reason I ask is because, when I was younger, when I was first starting my business, I always had this vision for what I would like to live like. I mean, what could my life look like if I worked really hard? And I started in 1986 with 6 people, and now I have over 200, and it's been great. But I have to tell you, when you start your own business, and I'm sure you're going to parallel some of this, for the first few years, you're drowning, and you're like, I'm stealing money to pay bills, that money I don't have. And then you finally start to tread water, and you're like, okay, I think I can survive here for a couple of years. And then you start to make a little money, and you're like, wow, this is exactly why I did this, because there's some breathing room and some money. And then you become, very successful. And then the first reaction you get is, this is so cool. Oh my God, I don't want anyone to take it away from me. I don't want to lose this. You know what I mean? So was there that kind of parallel with the band's success, where you got to a point where you're like, man, this is just so unbelievable. How do we keep this up? How do you keep it going?
Yeah. And well, it was funny what you're talking about in terms of, the build where we didn't start making money until the end of 2003, our first headlining tour. Up until that point, it was all per diem. It was $20 a day for food and whatever else we needed.
Holy cow, is that right? $20 a day for
Yeah, and we were driving ourselves around in a passenger van with a U-Haul behind it for a year and a half. And so it wasn't the glamorous life of a rock star that you imagine.
Yeah.
It's even harder. I think, the music industry has always been exploitive of artists, of course.
Sure.
It's really kind of impossible to make money unless you're a really big star, because touring is really expensive. I mean, there's a lot of overhead. And when you put out an album also, you're making a small percentage of profit after you've recouped the expenses, and the
Yeah,
expenses are massive. You know, there's a lot of overhead to put out an album, to put a band on the road for months before you see any profit. So, I mean, you have to get to the point where you have a gold platinum record before you start seeing any money. And that was the case for us. But it was just strange because we were a decade into being a band at that point when we finally started having that kind of success. And then it did start to pour in a little quicker, and the lifestyle kind of shifts. You know, now we had a tour bus, and we actually had hotel rooms. We weren't just sleeping on, you know, couches and the back seat of the van. So you know, it was a change that happened pretty dramatically at that point. I know that some of the guys got wrapped up in, you know, I want to have a nice suit and a nice watch and a Mercedes Benz and all that, which is
right.
natural. I think, you know, if you've worked that hard for that long, you want to kind of live the life a little bit. But yeah, there was that feeling of, this could go away in an instant. You know, there's no way, we can't say no to anything because it took this long and this much, you know, just the planets aligning, you know, for us to get to this moment. We have to just keep going full steam ahead in order to maintain this, because it could all end tomorrow. And that was both good business sense, I think, in terms of striking while the iron is hot and not burning any bridges, you know, saying yes to everything and you know, establishing a career. But it was also pretty toxic in terms of the toll it was taking on us, and me in particular as the drummer who was breaking down physically and psychologically and emotionally on the road.
Yeah, you were talking about that in the book, and we're going to get to that in a second. First off, I have to compliment you on the book. I mean, I wrote a book myself, and I realize how hard it is to do, and how hard it is to put yourself out there, especially some of the personal and private stuff, you know. And but the good news with your book, and I'm out just so everyone can see it. It's called Harder to Breathe. And by the way, I absolutely love the cover. I mean, the cover with the crew, I mean, the whole band, it's just amazing, the design and the artwork and everything. But you know, when you talk about this book, you write so well that I can almost hear your voice when I'm reading the book. And I think that's a big compliment, because I can tell it's you. I can feel that it's you. I can kind of feel some of the emotions that you go through. And you talked a lot about, you know, that schedule was like, oh my gosh, flying back and forth across the country. And then all of a sudden I got to do this interview. Then I got to do these pictures, and I'm not getting any sleep. So what was the first time that you thought, oh, this is like really taking a toll on me as far as my playing ability?
Well, thank you. First off, thank you for that compliment. You know, in terms of the voice of the writing, that's something I really strove for, and I wanted to be vulnerable more than anything, really be honest in writing the book. And so if you got that feeling from it, that's the biggest compliment.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the touring, I think it wasn't something that happened one day or one night. It was something that happened over time. But I think it was probably somewhere in the middle of our first headlining tour, in the fall of 2003, about a year and a half to 2 years into touring, because things really did start to ramp up in terms of just the amount that was being asked of us. You know, we had been opening for other acts and basically playing half-hour sets, and it was a high demand in terms of the amount of shows that we were playing. And then we had all the meet and greets and the, you know, the acoustic shows and the radio performances. And it was a lot, but there was a lot of energy carrying us through, and there was a lot of anticipation. But when we got to the point that we were headliners, and it was, you know, an hour and a half of playing the whole record and whatever else we could fit in there in terms of covers and to fill, you know, a headlining set, I hadn't really learned proper technique and how to maintain the, you know, endurance of playing every night in that way, and was just kind of running on fumes at that point. And then it just really felt like we didn't have any downtime or any time to ourselves to recuperate. And I was also kind of an introverted person, and put a lot of pressure on myself too. So it was all the internal pressure and the external pressure really became reached a fever pitch around that headlining tour. And then in 2004, when we went overseas, there was a moment where I had been, thinking at some point we're going to have some downtime. We're going to have a month off where we can recuperate, and I'll feel rejuvenated for the next leg of this massive now world
Right.
tour that we were doing. And the reality of that just kept evaporating. The bigger and bigger we got, and the more countries we kept touring to and continents. I remember looking at our calendar and seeing, oh, we have a week off in September. We can come home and I can relax. And then it was like, nope, we got to go to Brazil, or nope, we got to do another video and another photo shoot. And so there was a moment I remember when we were in Milan, and we had just played a string of shows. I was really exhausted, and I was looking forward to a week off. And then they told us on the way to the airport that we had to go to Australia and do a whole week there. And I just really hit the wall. I mean, I felt so deflated. I remember sitting like in the middle of the international terminal in Milan with a backpack on, and just kind of huddled over with my head in my arms. And it must have looked pathetic, with all the travelers walking around us in the middle of the airport. But none of the guys really came over and said anything. I think they knew at that moment that I was really struggling. And I didn't know what else to do at that point. I really felt like I was having a breakdown.
So when, again, I'm a drummer, and when I've played out probably 15 or 20 times and got paid, very little, if nothing, to do it, but it's just fun to do. And it's fun to be with my buddies. And if you make enough money to pay the babysitter, you're doing good. So, but I can remember when I was playing, I would play the same song, I could play it multiple different ways and it would still be good. No one really knew if I missed something or if I made a mistake, because, they weren't expecting. Now, as a world-class drummer like you were in this band, would I have been able to tell that you were starting to hurt from your playing? Would I have been able to see or hear anything, or was it just that perfectionism and you saying, man, that was just a smidge off, but no one's going to know about it?
I think for a long time you probably wouldn't have been able to tell, and it was what you just described in terms of me being perfectionistic and really just obsessive compulsive and hyper focused on trying to get everything just right. I think the other band members at a certain point started noticing things that were just a little off. At times when I would drop a beat or flub something, and I don't know if the audience would have necessarily noticed those things. But it was just a feeling that I was losing control over my instrument. But at the end, when things started really breaking down, I mean, I was dealing with really bad chronic pain in my shoulder, and then nerve discoordination, just inability to move my arms in a way that I used to. And then I think, yeah, as a drummer, you would have been able to tell that there was something wrong. I was not playing the way that I was on the record, and I was just doing whatever I could to kind of contort myself to get through a show. And then it became, obvious to everyone, the band members and everything.
So you talk about the perfectionism, and I'm one of those people where if I don't park my car perfectly straight in the garage, I have to straighten it up, and I mean, that's an illness. There's no question. And, but I think that there's two types of perfectionists. I think one of them is somebody who wants something to be just perfect and awesome and great all the time. And then if that goes too far, then you just start finding what's wrong in everything. And I remember looking at a BMW brochure and finding a typo. And I was like, this is Germany. This is BMW. There's a typo in their brochure. And I remember going to the dealer and I thought, is it bad that I found that? Or is it something I should have noticed because you want it to be right? You know what I mean? So what did the perfectionism take a different turn at that point for you?
Well, first off, as a fellow perfectionist, I appreciate the fact that you keep your car straight in the lines, because I'm the guy next to you that's, pissed off when the guy's tail is sticking out over the line, So thank you for being meticulous in that way.
Yeah.
No, I can certainly relate to that. And it's funny that you mentioned the typo, because just this morning I was scrolling through my news feed on my phone, and I was thinking to myself, where is the quality control? You used
Right.
you pick up the LA Times, and if there was a typo, you could send a letter to the editor and tell them it was wrong, and they would correct it. It's like there's no quality control on the internet, and you have to read headlines with misspellings and poor syntax. And I'm just like, what is going on? So that drives me nuts. I think there's a difference between striving for excellence. I mean, there's a fine line between striving for excellence and being meticulous in doing so, and having it become something that's ruling your life in a negative way.
Right. Right.
I think that you can be somebody who cares a lot about the details and wants things to be as good as it can be, especially something that you're creating. But then if you cross over into the point where nothing is ever good enough, and it actually becomes a hindrance, the perfect becomes the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes sort of a disorder. And yes, it was that way for me for a long time. I think that I have crossed over in my recovery. In writing this book, I think I've struck a balance in that I wanted it to be excellent. I understood there was no such thing as perfection. I wanted to, sort of exercise every demon and everything I could do to make it as good as it could possibly be, but recognizing that at a certain point it would just be done, and I couldn't, really try to take it any further when it had reached the place that it could get to. So I think that shows growth in that I was able to execute that, and it wasn't, that level of meticulousness was not a hindrance to me. It was just a source of trying to strive for excellence.
So just like with me, I never woke up one day and said, hey, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to write this book on vision and how there's many ways to be successful and all the characteristics of entrepreneurship. And I'm going to do this. It just kind of happened. My daughter was suffering from a pretty serious illness, and my wife and I were scared to death for about 5 years. And I started thinking about what's really important in life and what should you be chasing if you're going to chase something. And I kept coming back with comfort, peace, and freedom, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But did you ever wake up one day and say, I'm going to write a book? Or how did that come about?
Well, writing a book was actually something I had a fantasy or a dream of when I was a kid.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I loved writing, creative writing. I wrote some poetry. I wrote short stories. And I used to tell my family members, like, yeah, I'm going to write a novel and I'm going to be a published author someday. And then that dream kind of was deferred by the fact that, I had other passions, but obviously music became the number one, and it became the thing that was all consuming in my life. I was still writing during that time. I got a degree in English from UCLA. And obviously I had to do a lot of writing in the English major. I was writing poetry even when I was on the road and afterwards. That was kind of my daily journal, was writing poetry. But the whole idea of writing a novel, it wasn't really something that was on my mind. When I left the band and I went through everything I did, a couple of years into the aftermath of that, the first notion of writing a book about my life came into my mind. Because I knew I had stories to tell that might have been unique or interesting. But at that time, I didn't know what the purpose of it would be. It felt like it would have maybe just been, my ego wanting to have a book and put it out. And it seemed a little bit desperate at that time because I was going through a hard time, and it would have just been sad. And I was actually approached by someone at that time to do a book, and they wanted to either co-write or ghostwrite. And I was like, if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write it myself.
Right.
And I turned it down. And then years later, in 2016, I got sober, and I started this journey of recovery from both what had become alcoholism and pretty severe anxiety disorder and depression. And I started this whole new path in life that was based on being of service and giving of myself in a helpful way. I went back to school to get a master's in clinical psychology and become a therapist. And it was in the course of doing all that work that it kind of hit me. I have a story to tell, but now it has a happy ending, and it has a purpose, which is to hopefully, inspire people in recovery, inspire people that might see themselves in my story and the things that have challenged me, and the fact that I've been able to turn a corner and start this whole new life. So that's when it became not just an idea and like, I have to write this book. This is my new mission. And it became all consuming and something I just kind of dove into head first. And then it didn't really feel like work. It was a lot of work, but it felt like one of those things that when I was doing it, time had no meaning. It was just,
Right.
I was working on this thing. I was so deeply in flow that I wasn't going to stop until it was done.
So to talk a little bit about what you write about in the book, and I want to get to the baseball in a minute because that's another thing you and I have in common.
Right.
Baseball career as a 12-year-old. You paint such amazingly clear and obviously some painful pictures about what you went through there. You know, when you had the meeting at the mansion, you talk about the meeting at the mansion. I swear I was in the room after I read that part of the book. I felt like I was in the room.
Mm.
So how did you get that clarity, and how did you get the brave, to be brave enough to tell that story about, basically them telling you, hey, this is kind of it.
Well, that I chose that scene to be the start of the book, the prologue, because I had a couple choices to go with in terms of what the significant moment was to start with. And I felt that I wanted to take the approach of looking at it like this was a mystery, or a murder mystery or something. And this was the crime scene. This is the moment, cut to the scene where you find the dead body or the murder happens. And there's just all the questions in your mind, like, how did it get to this point? And where does it go after that? And to me, that was the pivotal moment in my life where everything in my life had led up to there in terms of the journey that I was on with the band, and then everything that has happened since. And so it was that climax, or that tragic moment, that I wanted to be a cliffhanger. And in deciding to start the book with that, I realized I had to really set the scene. I had to really take the reader there in a way that felt like you could smell the carpet in that room,
Right. And you did.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it went through a couple drafts. That was something I decided early on, but it was hard because I think on my second draft, I probably about 3 chapters into my second draft is when I really found my voice, and when I realized the level of detail that I needed and the way in which I had to be truly vulnerable and talk about what I was going through. And so I revisited that prologue a couple times, and then again at the very end. That was the last thing I was really working on to make sure I got it right. Was really just capturing how heartbreaking that moment was for me, and how tangible my life shifted in that moment, and what that felt like.
Well, in that same interview that I watched with the Eagles the other day, Joe Walsh talks about the same thing. And, talk about 2 world-class musicians, you and Joe Walsh, right? You have a lot in common there. But he talks about how the band was him and he was the band, and the band was his life and it was his identity. And that was everything and all of it. His friends, his connections, all of it. And so when that went away, he kind of drifted for like 10 years before he figured out, how to get himself squared away. That kind of happened to you. Did it take you a while to unwind from the reality of that? And how long did it take before you accepted, even though you were still trying to get yourself better? And I get that with medicines and obviously numbing yourself with alcohol, which we all do, to ease some of those pains. How long did it take you to kind of say, wow, this is my new reality?
Well, thank you for comparing me to Joe Walsh. That's a new one. I appreciate that comparison. Talking about a world-class musician. Yeah, I mean, when I left the band, it was more than just the loss of a career, and obviously a lot of the fortune that would come with it. It was the loss of my whole identity. That was so much of my self-definition at that point, because I started the band when I was 16 and I was 28 when I was leaving. So it was really the formation of my young adulthood and everything that was defining of me. And also my entire social world. The band were my closest friends. All of my friends from college had become a part of this circle that was, around the band, at the center of it. And And so I really felt alienated from the people and the things that were my biggest, biggest pieces of my identity. And so it was a loss that I relate to grief. I had to grieve losing not a loved one, but something that was deeply beloved to me, and defining of me. So I fell into a depression. I went through really all the stages of grief, being in denial at first, really just grappling with, this isn't happening, this can't be happening. And the alcoholism and the anxiety and the depression were all a part of that grieving process. And it took about a decade to go through all the stages, where I was at a certain point, under the illusion that I was moving on and that I was getting my shit together, when really I was still suffering and I hadn't really dealt with it. I was just kind of brushing everything under the rug, and thinking that if I can just control and moderate my drinking, I'll be all right. Meanwhile, my anxiety was getting worse and worse, and I was getting more and more isolated and really stagnant in my life, sort of spiritually broken, and not really moving forward, intellectually or emotionally, just stuck in that place, and I got tired of living that way. It was like, I remember times in my life when I was joyful. I remember times in my life when I was inspired and motivated to take on new challenges, and I wasn't doing any of that or feeling any of that, and just, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so, there were a lot of things that came at the end of that phase of my life that were truly humbling, but it was just at a certain moment when my girlfriend said to me, I can't see you living this way anymore. I think you need help, was kind of the last straw to hear that finally. I think I was ready already, but I needed to hear it from her. And then going into rehab, and it was actually the second time I went into rehab. The first time it was a good experience, but it didn't take. But this time I really was ready. I was just in that place. You can call it a bottom, or just being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it was terrifying to start that journey and to wake up in the detox wing of the Betty Ford Center. But very quickly, within a matter of a couple weeks, I was feeling a new lease on life. I was feeling really motivated and inspired for the first time in a really long time. And it has led to things that I could not have anticipated in my wildest dreams in terms of what I'm doing in my life now.
It's funny because I wrote down sick and tired of being sick and tired on my notes here to talk to you about that today, because I would have to feel, again, I was reading about your 9-year journey, and what was a little frustrating for me was that you had so much medical advice, take this medication or take that medication, and then they weren't necessarily working, or one would create something else that was another problem that you weren't expecting. And then, drinking kind of like put the mustard on the hot dog for all of that for you to kind of ease it. And I just felt really bad that that you had gone through all those attempts to heal yourself with medications, and that was kind of taking you down at the same time. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, you put that really well. It was really frustrating, and in a lot of ways, it kind of it really broke down my faith in modern medicine, and just in the faith that I was going to heal and get better, because I wanted so badly to believe that there was a fix, and I think that growing up in the culture that we do, and the way that we look at Western medicine, to a certain degree, we all fall victim to this to a certain extent, of just wanting a miracle cure, or just being a little narrow-sighted in terms of what a solution might be. It's like there's something specific that's wrong, and there's a very specific answer to it. The human body and the human mind and the human spirit is a little more complex than that, right?
Right.
Sometimes it is as simple as there's a pill that will reduce inflammation, or there's a physical therapy or something that's going to shift, the dynamic, and then that's the answer that you needed. But for a lot of ailments, it's more complex than that. There's mind-body connection. You have to believe that you're healing, and you have to change things in a really dynamic way in order to really heal. What was frustrating more than anything was that, if you have a broken bone, you can go to an orthopedist, and they're going to know exactly what to do with that, right?
Right.
You have a nerve condition, you can go to a neurologist, and they're going to know exactly what to do with that. And so our medical system is set up well for very specific ailments. But I felt like when I would go to each of these doctors, they were only seeing that narrow thing, and that nobody was really looking at the big picture. What's going on globally? Why is
Gotcha.
this happening? Why is he breaking down in this way? And so deep down, I was feeling like every time somebody would tell me, "Oh, there's inflammation in your shoulder, or there's slowing of the nerves in your arm, or whatever it is," I would say to myself, "Yeah, but that doesn't capture the whole thing." And so I just kept feeling more and more like there was something wrong with me that was bigger, and that I was defective in some way, that I was, it was to my core that there was something in me that was a failure. And so going through all of that, I think, was something that really beat down my confidence and my self-esteem. And so when it wasn't getting better, when every pill that a doctor would give me, or every, injection of cortisone or physical therapy didn't help, it just got more and more demoralizing. And so in retrospect, looking back, I realized that it's the mind, body, spirit thing that has been healing for me, the connection, the holistic approach to healing. And when I say that, I don't mean something really mystical or
Right.
like it's beyond human means. I just mean that all of the systems of our body and the system and the way that our mind and our spirit connect to it, it's all integrated. And I believe that you need to treat yourself, or a patient, as an organism, as a system that is a collection of systems, and not just look at sometimes what's wrong with one joint or one system. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I totally agree with you there. I'm pretty into preventative treatments for the things that I do. And I think we're going to start seeing the switch from reactive medicine to proactive medicine, because there's so many new ways to think about, things like stem cells and peptides and exosomes and all those kinds of things that can let your body heal itself. Okay. Or tell your body how to heal itself, rather than just, like you said, going after the symptom. So what, so many times when you hear about people who are addicted to something, their friends and they just stop doing it. Okay. What do people not understand about addiction? What would our listeners like to know that maybe they don't understand about having addictions?
Well, I think rooted in that statement is the assumption that, it's just about willpower, that you just need to have the will to stop or to control it in some way. And I think what people don't understand is that willpower is a part of the disease, believing that you have that control, because at a certain point when you become an addict, you don't have that control. You don't have the ability to self-regulate in that way. That's the nature of the disease. So telling someone, "Hey, why can't you just control your drinking? Why can't you just stop?"
Yeah.
That is actually just maintaining the illusion, that they have that control. And that's what they're telling themselves. That's what I was telling myself. Maybe I can just switch to beer or to wine. Maybe I can just only drink on the weekends. The longer I would tell myself that, the more I was rationalizing my drinking. It's like,
Right.
why was drinking so important, that as negative as it had become in my life, I still wanted to try to find a way to incorporate it into my life that I thought was going to be a healthier way. It's like,
Right.
meanwhile, well, I'm becoming more and more depressed, more and more anxious, more isolated. My relationships are being affected. I'm stagnant in my life. It's like, but still I'm negotiating with myself a way that I can control it, right? As
Right.
opposed to surrendering and realizing, okay, this thing has beaten me. And the only way that I'm going to be able to kick it is if I, surrender to somebody else's way, not to try to control it myself. That's a hard thing for people to understand, certainly for addicts to understand, but for families or friends of addicts who don't understand what they're going through. So yeah, I think that the first step in any kind of recovery, whether it's the 12 steps or a cognitive behavioral approach or anything else, and I don't think there's only one way to recover or to quit. But I do think that acceptance is step one, no matter what you're doing, because if you still believe those myths, if you're still in denial, if you're still rationalizing your drinking or using, then no other kind of intervention is really going to do anything. It has to come from within. It has to come from that surrender.
So, you talk about so many of the amazing people that we lost during this same type of process, so many amazing artists. And have you ever thought, how did I get through it? Like, how did I beat that dead end path?
Yeah, I consider myself extremely lucky, and to have had the clarity that I had at the moment that I did, and the support that I had. Um, I was truly blessed in a lot of ways, and being able to recognize that and recognize that I had something to live for and something to fight for in terms of motivation for sobriety, because it could have gone a much worse way, you know. I was in rehab with people one of the most startling things, and the things that stuck with me most in rehab was like how many people in there were still in denial. I'm
Wow.
talking about guys that were, you know, at the Betty Ford Center waiting for a liver, you know, literally in stage 4 cirrhosis and still in denial. And I'm like, that is powerful. And I considered myself really lucky to be someone who realized like that could be me in another 5 or 10 years
Yeah.
if I don't change and start walking in the other direction. And so yeah, I don't know what it was that gave me the resilience or the ability to surrender at that moment in my life. But I think it is probably a testament to the background that I had, the family that I had, the support that I had, and just recognizing that there were things worth living for.
Getting back to the book quickly, why was it important for you in your treatment to write an autobiography? You mentioned early on that, okay, in order to do this right, I need to write an autobiography. How did that come about?
Well, I think some of it, when I turned down, the offer for somebody else to write a book with me or for me, there was some ego involved, of course. I,
Yeah.
I I considered myself a pretty good writer, and I always wanted to write a book myself. Um, and and then, as some time passed, and I was actually in grad school getting my master's degree in clinical psychology when I started writing the book, which is not something I recommend, by the way. To write a book while you're getting your master's degree.
Right.
I probably should have waited till I graduated, but it turned out all right. But it was just something that I had to start doing it because it was coming out of me, and I had to put it down. I think that what it was that I had done so much work in my own recovery and in my own life, in therapy, in rehab, in the 12 steps, then being a sponsor, and then volunteering at a recovery center. I had been telling my story a lot already. And each time I told it, I realized how powerful it was for me and how much the message of it became clearer for other people, for people that were listening to me speak. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback about my ability to sort of articulate things that I'd gone through and the lessons that I learned. And I had to continue that process when I was studying to become a therapist, because to be a therapist, you obviously have to have worked through your own stuff. And, I got a lot of great advice. It's like, if there are things you haven't dealt with in your own mind and in your own experience, it's going to show up in your clients. And then you're going to have to deal with it then.
Wow.
And you don't want that to happen, because that makes things really complicated in terms of your professionalism.
Sure.
Uh, and a lot of therapists don't do that work, and it's unfortunate. But I took it very seriously. And also, a lot of the papers that I was writing were self-reflection papers. The assignments, the first person you have to analyze and do a case study on is yourself. So doing that and really taking it to that level of looking at myself as a patient, and doing a case conceptualization on myself. The first thought I had was, well, maybe if I read a book about myself like that, where it's a case study on the things that I was challenged by and what worked for me, how I found recovery, then that would be helpful for some people. I had to kind of check myself, because I realized most people out there are going to be bored if it's a lot of psychobabble and it's
Yeah.
written like a master's, paper. So I shifted into, well, the best way to do this is to just tell my story in a relatable way. Don't hit people over the head with what the messages they need to take from it, or what, psychoanalyzing myself. Just tell the story, just tell it in a really honest and vulnerable way, where the feelings and the emotions are apparent and that the reader can relate to it. And then they'll hopefully take the message from it just from going along on that ride. And in writing that second draft, I realized it needs to be a narrative. It needs to be it needs to read like it's a novel, like you're just
Right.
invested in the character, and you understand what they're going through, and you want to see them get better.
So quickly, in just a few minutes we have left, talking to Ryan Dusick, founding drummer of Maroon 5, author, and also family therapist, which is just amazing. The baseball story is simple. I was 12 years old. I was in the little league, and I was a pitcher. And my favorite pitch was the changeup, and I could slow that thing down so far. And so when I was reading your story, I actually laughed out loud, because our end game was a little different. I faced against a team from Pennsylvania, and I was holding my own on the mound, and we were in the last 28 teams in the World Series, so we're trying to get to the big show. And I'll never forget this guy. He comes to the plate, and he had a beard, and he was supposed to be 12 or 13 years old. I think he drove to the game. I mean, but I threw a couple of changeups at him, and I looked over at my pitching coach, and he said, "Do it again." And strike one, strike two. So I looked at him and I waved him off. I'm like, there's no way I'm throwing another changeup to this guy. And I had a mouthful of chewing gum, and I'm looking at him going, no, no, no. He said, throw him one more. I threw it, Ryan. He hit that ball so far over my head. I looked up and I looked backwards. The outfielder was running in, and he turned around and ran backwards. He must have hit this ball 400 feet. And so my changeup story is a little different from yours, because you actually won a championship with yours.
Wow, that's unfortunate, but at least you got that far,
You did. Yeah, it was super fun getting that far.
Yeah,
So,
for me, it was one of those exciting moments, at 12, when it was epic. I struck the guy out to end the game. We won the championship, and it was like in the movies, when the kids put you on their shoulders. And to this day, look, I did all these great things with the band, and I'm doing things that are really an honor to be involved with now. But being 12 years old and having that experience is still probably my favorite memory.
oh yeah, easily. There's no question. I can remember being there again, chewing the gum and staring the guy down. I used to love playing baseball.
Yeah.
So, I think the world is probably so incredibly proud of what you've gone through and how you've come out the other side and what you're doing now. In my company and in my life, I do a lot of giving back. I believe that, you don't give back because you want something out of it, but you know what? I can't explain it, but karma just seems to bless you more when you're willing to give away. It just seems to happen. And again, I don't recommend you doing charity because you think you're going to win something. No, but it just seems to work that way. So, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do that. Tell us about the great things that you're doing now. You went back to school, you got your degree, and now you're doing some counseling. Tell us about that. It's a really cool story.
Yeah, it all kind of started, it all grew out of my own recovery. And one of the things they tell you early on is, being of service is a great way to get out of yourself. And because, part of addiction is the self-obsession. Your world gets smaller and smaller, and all of your thoughts and emotions are based around how you're feeling at any given moment. And that is just toxic. And any way you can get out of that self-obsession is helpful to you. So being of service early on is just about, starting and maintaining your own recovery, creating some balance in your mind and your life, and doing esteemable acts. Because how do you build self-esteem? You do esteemable acts, right? So that's how it started for me. But then it became a passion for me. It was something I was interested in. And I got sober right before I hit 40. And in my 40s, I have felt like my life at least, has more meaning if I'm doing something that is affecting someone else in a positive way. It's not all about me, even though it does make me feel good to be
Sure.
giving of myself. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But discovering talents and things that I had in giving of myself was helpful in terms of regaining my confidence and finding a new path in life. So I went back to school. I've become a therapist. I'm working at a clinic called the Missing Piece Center for Anxiety, and I've started my own practice. I have private clients as well. I wrote this book and put it out, Harder to Breathe, as a way of extending that ability to hopefully, help people in a broader way. Because when you write a book and you tell a story of hope, people can gain something from that, but also there's opportunities that might come with that in terms of speaking to people, it's really just been like one thing that has led into another thing, and opportunities have come, and I hope they will continue to come, where I'm both using, you know, the things that I've learned and the talents that are skills that I've gained, but also just showing up for other people and being of service in a way that's fulfilling for me, but also helpful for others. So for me, it's at this point, it's author and speaker, and then therapist and coach.
Well, again, you're doing amazing things with your life, and you know, we're all blessed to have had you make the music that you've made over the years. But now you're into something that I think is just so honorable and a great way to give back. Because I can tell you, it would seem to me that someone who reads your book, and I suggest everybody read this book. It's great. It's called Harder to Breathe: Memoir of Making Maroon 5, Losing It All, and then Finding Recovery. I think, you know, for someone who might read this book, it might say to them, you know what, there is a way out of this. Okay. Maybe I'm hesitating going to see this therapist, but because I read this book, now I'm going to go do it because there is a way. It's kind of a stepping stone to getting there. So congratulations on writing the book. I hope it really does great for you. The last thing I want to talk about was, I mentioned comfort, peace, and freedom earlier. And those were the things that I just couldn't get away from when I was writing my book about what we should be chasing in life. And everyone's version of that is different. You know, we're not all going to chase, you know, yachts or this or that. I mean, living in a great place where you can say, I'm comfortable and peaceful and I'm free, I think is the nirvana that we should all be chasing after. It's the end game that we should all be after. So just a quick couple of things. Where are you your most comfortable?
I suppose I'm most comfortable right here in my studio / man cave, because you know, everything that has ever been important to me is in this room. You know, all the musical stuff from my background, but also, you know, I wrote my book at this desk. I did all my, when the pandemic hit and I was in grad school and we went online, I did all my classes right here on this computer. When I first started seeing clients on Zoom during the pandemic, it was right here on this computer.
Nice.
And so there's I mean, and the great thing about this room was that, you know, I have this home in the San Fernando Valley, and I'd lived here for a few years trying to build this room, and it just wasn't happening. We couldn't figure out how to do the logistics of it, because it was a garage that I ended up having to knock down. I ended up breaking ground on building this room the week that I checked into Betty Ford.
Oh, wow.
And and so building this room, this what was supposed to be a studio and then turned into an office of sorts, was kind of paralleled my journey of recovery. It was going up, and the structure was built, and there was just the wood structure there as I was in early recovery. And then you see all of the plumbing go in, and as I'm making, there's a parallel there in terms of building this room and building my new life.
Rebuilding you, yeah.
So it does feel like my safe place. It does feel like it's a big part. I've never been drunk in this room. You know, it's a happy place, and it's a place of discovery and creativity. But other than that, you know, being in my office at work and working with clients is a safe place for me too. It's a place where I feel calm and serene and comfortable.
Where might you find the most peace then?
The most peace. Well, you know, I go and I play softball every Sunday morning. And I do that for a number of reasons. One is because my dad at 76 is still out there, and I'm going to keep playing with him as long as he's out there.
Okay.
Two is because baseball was my innocence. It was my youthful passion before there was anything that was grown-up passion.
Love it.
It's just a place to reconnect to my 12-year-old self. And it's not, you know, there's an aggressive side that comes out, of course, when you're being competitive and wanting to win and wanting to hit the ball hard. So it's not all, I guess, peaceful, but it is an innocent place, and it's a place where I can tap into a part of myself that was less complicated in a less complicated time. And It's just, it kind of centers me. It's a part of my self-care.
So then we'll end on freedom. Where do you feel the most free?
The most free. You know, it was an interesting feeling. When my book came out, the week that it came out, I spoke at an in-store appearance, you know, a book signing. And public speaking is something that is relatively new to me. It's something I had to pick up when I was in grad school. and was a little terrified of, having had the anxiety disorder that I had. It's ironic because I had been on stage probably 1,000 times before as a drummer. But there was something that happened in talking about my book and talking about my journey that was very freeing. Realizing that all these people were listening to me and I had something to tell them that they wanted to hear and that was hopefully helpful to them, that I didn't anticipate that feeling. I anticipated, being excited about, the moment of having a book out and people coming into a signing, but being up there and realizing that I had something to offer. There was a sense of freedom in that. There was a sense that I had overcome a lot. It was just that culmination of the things I had overcome and that I was in a different place in my life. So I don't know if it answers the question fully, but it felt like freedom in that moment. I'm looking forward to more opportunities to feel that.
Excellent. Ryan Dusick, author, founding member of Maroon 5, and speaker, and also a family counselor. It has been such a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I know you're busy, and I wish you all the success in the world in pursuing those things that you want to do to help others to get through what you've gone through. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate having this opportunity. It was a great talk.
You got it.